Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Subodh, the Dean of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this special webinar celebrating the South Asian Heritage Month. I know that many of you are still joining in, and I have a great panel here, so I'll introduce the panel and then I'm going to say a few words. But today is primarily about celebrating South Asian heritage in context of us as the Royal College Psychiatrists. There's a certain irony. I think I don't know if you all can see this. I'm wearing the college T-shirt, and so there's a certain irony in us celebrating South Asian heritage, and me being the dean of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. I'm sure that'll come up in conversation, and many people in the room probably will have because it's intertwined. Our history, our heritage is intertwined with. I guess the colonial history, and I think it's interesting that clearly all of us, all the panelists here, I'm going to introduce them in a minute, have all been ex-colonies of the UK. So I think I feel that'll be a very interesting discussion, but primarily it's about stories today. So I think I want us to focus on our stories, and in the interest of the kind of storytelling, feel free to introduce yourself, where you're from, in the chat box. Please remember this is a public forum, so use the kind of language and be civil to each other, which I'm sure everybody will be. If you want to pose questions, please use the Q&A box. There will be plenty of time for questions. I intend to have at least half an hour, if not more, for questions. And I'm sure, given what our panel will have to say, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So the discussion is kind of going to move from our stories to hopefully a conversation about the interaction between British psychiatry, particularly, and the South Asian psychiatry. And I think this panel is particularly skilled, I think, in doing that. So hopefully that we'll have a rich discussion on that. And at the end, I think we'll have a whole section. I think hopefully we'll discuss the role of culture in psychiatry and the role of our experience as migrant psychiatrists in how do we shape our clinical interactions with our patients here in the UK, but also globally. How do we shape psychiatry itself? And then ask the big question, like, is all of psychiatry transcultural psychiatry? And if so, then what does this group have to say about it? And what does this group have to inform the rest of the world and the rest of the psychiatrists and the science of psychiatry about this? So feel free to contribute to that discussion as we go along. But let me now start by introducing our panel. First on my left is Dr. Sridevi Sira Mahalingappa, a good friend. She's the president of the British Indian Psychiatric Association, a liaison psychiatrist like myself, and a psychiatrist who's worked in multiple jurisdictions. I think she'll tell you a bit more, but I think multiple countries. And the next is, we've got the Illuminati here, I think so, Professor Sanjeev Jain. A lot of you will know of him if you haven't met him. I think he's probably one of the most intelligent and the most articulate men I know. I learn from him each time I speak to him. A molecular geneticist, but also a historian of medicine, but particularly colonial psychiatry. And I think I am sure that there'll be lots of questions that we will have to ask of him. He has a rich tapestry of stories to tell, and each of which I think kind of illuminates a certain part of our contemporary work in psychiatry. So I think it's quite exciting. And then a lot of you will know Anis, my colleague and friend from Birmingham, president of the British Bangladeshi Psychiatric Association, forensic psychiatrist, and ex-chair of the Volunteering in Psychiatry Special Interest Group. So has done a lot of work, a lot of interesting work in multiple areas, and hopefully we'll get to hear his story too. And then last but not least, we have Saima, Niaz, again, a very good friend, a very dynamic psychiatrist, very interested in community and community building. And Saima, you've done the work with public mental health leadership course, so grateful for that. And a very dynamic member of the British Pakistani Psychiatric Association. So welcome to all of you. So like I said, we're going to start with stories. Anis, I'm going to start with you. I'll come back to with my story maybe. Well, let me tell a little anecdote, because it came to me this morning as I was running. I was thinking about what story to tell, and I think often there are stories are all about I think acclimatization to the British way of life, and I have to say Ananta is not here. I'm talking from home, and some of you may know that Ananta is my wife. So Ananta and I kind of moved together to the UK, quite new to the, obviously the British way of life. Had never been here before. I'd in fact never been in a plane before I moved to the UK. The first time I moved to the UK was when I took a plane, and obviously I'd not read the highway code. I could barely drive. I'd learned driving just before coming, but that was driving on Mumbai roads, Bombay is what it was called then, where I'm sure my driving instructor was managing the car himself. So I don't think I'd really learned driving. Anyway, to cut a long story short, on one of the days when I had to go and attend my MRC psych training course, a colleague, an IMG himself, took Ananta and I, offered us a lift. On the way back, we thought that we'd go for a movie, watch a movie at a cinema hall in Walsall. We could see the showcase cinema. It's still there actually. So those of you who are from that part of the world will know what I'm talking about. It's next to the junction 9 of M6. You can see the showcase cinemas right next to the motorway. Now, this is the Indian thing to do, right? If you want somebody to drop you off, you say, just drop me off at the side of the road and we'll walk across. Don't have to come all the way to the cinema. That's what we did. We told him, drop us off at the side of the road. He dropped us off at the side of the road in the M6. I'm sure that Ananta and I are on some light camera action video somewhere, crossing the M6 with all the truck drivers honking very loudly. I don't know how we survived. Imagine 70 miles per hour truckers going across, and we've crossed the whole M6, the 6 or 7 or 8 lanes, whatever there are. And it was winter time as well. And then we realized that obviously the cinema was not something that we could access from the M6. We had to go up all the way to the junction and walk, take the exit, etc., which was like a 2-mile walk. So the challenges of migration are quite significant, you know. Yes, Anand, you're right. I mean, we could have been 2 psychiatrists short in this country on that day. I don't know how we survived, to be honest. You know, when I think about it, we can laugh about it now, but it's these are the kind of things. Obviously, nobody had told us that that's absolutely stupid. I mean, it's illegal as well. I'm sure it's illegal. Anyway, so that was my story. Anis, over to you.
Thank you, Subodh, and thank you, college, for giving us that opportunity to share our stories, because these kind of things you don't tend to write up, or you don't tend to any books to read about. So I'm going to tell my life story, but before I move on, I'd just like to share with you, Subodh, similar experience happened to me. Think of the railway station. It was very common in Bangladesh. You can just cross the rail line to go other side of the platform. It is very quick and efficient way. So I still now I get the temptation when I jump onto the train. And I know, fortunately, I've never done that one. Here, all the trail lines have some kind of electric power. So it is very dangerous if you jump on the train. And as a psychiatrist, we both know we have loads of patients sectioned either on the motorway or in the train station trying to cross the motor or the train lines. Yeah, these are funny experiences, but as you mentioned, the culture and migration have its own challenges. And if we are not aware where that person's come from, sometimes it is difficult to understand the motivation or the drive behind that actions. I think this is also comes into the context of, when we do the mental health assessment, someone trying to cross the motorway, whether it is a part of a manic presentation or that guy just simply doesn't know the rules of the country. And having the experience from other country, so we are best placed to make a judgment call, whether it is part of a just innocent knowledge, lack of knowledge, or part of the mental illness. Now, coming back to my story, I'm going to be candid here, so there may not be any structure in my storytelling, and I might be carried away. So do keep tab on the time. Um, I, I'm born and bred in Bangladesh, and my first encounter with psychiatry was in my father is a medical doctor, so we know we have some textbook. We read about that one, quite fascinating cases in these text books that we have at home. But the first meaningful contact with psychiatry was when I was in the high school, and there used to be a television program In Bangla, it calls Jodi Kichu Mone Na Koren. In English, it means if you don't mind. So it's basically a magazine program in TV. And in one of them TV program, the presenter went to a, um, mental health hospital, which was in Pabna, and that was one of the biggest mental health hospitals, uh, quite far from Dhaka. And he recorded some of the patients' stories, and it was done more of a very joyful or playful way, just make it fun, to be honest, rather than bringing out the sufferings of those patients. Because as you know, a mental disorder is always taken in lightheartedly sometimes, and people tend to make joke or fun out of it. And so we have all seen that one. I have a very queasy feeling when I've seen that one, because there's a one young girl. She looks like to be, in the hindsight now, suffering from manic episode, and she was asked what she could do. She said that I can sing like a Lata Mangeshkar, and she started singing a song. So they recorded it and they aired it, and behind the scene, people are laughing and joking of her performance. But then, a few months later, the presenter came back again in that script. That was a monthly program anyway. But that time, his face was very grim, and he was very apologetic for doing that program. The reason is that young girl wrote a letter. I think it's about a year, not few months, about a year later. She wrote a letter. Look, I'm well now. I'm back to home, but everyone is teasing me. Everyone is making joke of me because they have seen me performing in your TV program. And that really hurt me, that story. So what it means that girl rehabilitation was become almost impossible. So that was what I first came across through the TV program, and it stays in my mind. And when I finished my uh, higher school and went to the medical school, and I was fortunate to have a very good placement in psychiatry for a week. Because remember, psychiatry still at that time was not a first preference for various reasons. So one is financial. There's a very less financial incentive. So basically, if you are a surgeon or a medicine specialist, you can see a patient in 10 or 15 minutes time, and then you can earn loads of money seeing many, many patients in your private practice. But obviously, psychiatry needs time. And second, I'm talking about in 90s, there was still stigma, there is still lack of awareness that there is a specialty called psychiatrist where a patient could go. So at that time, most of these primary care mental health disorders are managed by medicine specialists. So most of the
psychiatrists time, Anish, let me just tell you that probably another minute more, and then I think we'll move to
okay.
Next presenter. But I want to hear more.
Yeah, sure. So at that point, there's a less incentive for people to get into the psychiatry. So at that point, I was more driven towards the behavior neurologist. But I was very lucky to have a excellent registrar at the Dhaka Medical College, and he introduced us very gently to the fascinating field of psychiatry. And I think the thing that really stay with me is that the story that the young girl, and it gives me a sense of accomplishment that we are the only specialist who can help the most vulnerable people in the community. I would stop there and we'll come back to the story later on after hearing the other people's story.
Thanks, Anish. But that was a powerful story. I think it's and I think especially kind of humiliation that sometimes happens very casually, I think is something that we are aware of coming from the subcontinent, but also being psychiatrists, I think, and we see this in both aspects of our identity, which I think is interesting. So thanks. Saima, can I go next to you? If you would like to share your story.
Thank you. So I'll try to be quick, but listening to Anis, it seems like we all have different and unique journeys. So I'm originally born and brought up in Pakistan, and I was reflecting back on my school years. I was very hardworking, studious. And I got scholarship during school years, during college, and then in medical school. And then when I decided to join psychiatry, it was during my fourth year medical school. And I received a lot of, at that time, stigma or other things attached, that you are very hardworking, you are very good, and you should be going into gynae or other well-off paid professions. Luckily, due to my family, they also supported me in that, though some were saying, no, go to the other field. And I joined psychiatry by choice, and it was my passion. Before entering into psychiatry, I went there and I did some observership after my medical school. And when I felt that I can do it, then I went for my higher education in psychiatry. And it was, I got the fellowship in Pakistan, and I worked over there as assistant professor as well. And I have experience of working with the World Psychiatric Association and World Health Organization over there. And coming to UK, so it's an interesting journey. Hopefully, I will be able to share more as we go by. But reflecting on it during this Asian Heritage Month, I feel humbled and proud to share my journey, because I began as a medical student in Pakistan, where I developed my passion. And then here, I'm currently working as a consultant psychiatrist in the National Health Service and various roles in the college, in the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And I'm proud to share that I have been elected as chair of the transcultural psychiatry group, special interest group. Thank you. And I'm just to add on to that, transcultural psychiatry is not new to me, or this diversity, because during my school years, I was presenting different cultures during your school dramas or other events. And then I got registered with, became a member of World Association of Cultural Psychiatry during my stay in Pakistan. So it was already there. And when I came over here, yeah, cultural difference was there. Though it was easy to adjust, because of our training in Pakistan is similar to UK. We read the same book, an ICD-10, an Oxford textbook of psychiatry, but it was a bit difficult, because forensic psychiatry and liaison psychiatry and other bits, crisis, it was not in Pakistan the way we manage people over there. But also, when I came over here, due to the cultural differences, I was lucky that I got the medical director who advised me to go and read the book Watching the English by Kate Fox. So it really helped me. And also regarding Subodh shared his driving the car, that experience. So I'm going to share my instructor was very surprised or shocked, because I was very good in, when there was no red light, I was very good in manipulating. I'm a very safe driver, because we used to sometimes drive in Pakistan in some areas where there was no red lights or traffic lights at that time. So I would say there are advantages of both cultures. And yeah, hopefully I will share more in my.
Thanks, Saima. I mean, yeah, as you say, unique journeys, everyone. Sanjeev, what's your story? You're on mute, Sanjeev.
So I don't know if I qualify for having a Indo-British experience, but
Well, you've been
I
here.
grew up.
You've been here plenty of times too.
Yeah, I've been here for a long time. I've visited for a long time, but I lived in Cambridge for a year. But it was just the sheer normality of it. For the first time, I don't know if my other colleagues noticed that we learned, ways of interviewing, and we would translate from English into our local language, and then translate into the patient's local language. So we usually do 2 or 3 translations in our heads before we talk to the patient. That was fairly common. And in India and in England, when I was actually working as a fellow at Addenbrooke's, it was such a surprise to me that I could ask patients directly from the textbook and they would answer directly from the textbook. It was an unusual experience for me to talk to patients who understood the questions that I was asking them without my needing to translate them. So this whole experience is how did we, 10,000 miles away, pick up the nuances of the questioning of psychological symptoms, which perfectly fitted East Anglia as much as they did Bangalore or New Delhi or Ranchi or Calcutta or Dhaka. And that was quite fascinating to me. I mean, I've been interested in the history of this, but I'll be talking more about that. But it was a very interesting way of approaching psychopathology because you just understood more nuances.
Yeah, yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I think, and so much of our work is to do with language, right? I think it's interesting that we end up holding those multiple translations in our head. Last but not the least, Sri.
Yeah, thank you so much for the college and for all of you to invite me here. I'm currently working as a consultant psychiatrist at South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust, and also the president at British Indian Psychiatric Association. So I'm from India. I really feel very blessed that, I had the opportunity to train and work in India, UK, and Australia. I also did education, teaching and training in Zambia as well. So I could see that there were some medical students who are attending. It's really, thank you so much for joining. And I'll briefly talk about some of the highlights of my training in these 3 countries. So I worked and did my diploma in psychiatry at Niaz, National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience, where Professor Sanjeev Jain is from. He was one of my supervisor as well. And this is where I really had a good, solid foundation for the psychiatry. I remember our ward round and even the corridor talks, they used to be so much rich in academic discussions. And, when Professor Jain was saying about psychopathology, we read almost like, we remember everything from each page of the fish psychopathology that time. And it was, I really felt, having that solid foundation in psychiatry really helped my interest in psychiatry. And it's really good that now in UK, from our British Indian Psychiatric Association, we have started webinar series on psychopathology. I'm really thankful to Professor Subodh. We are planning to reignite the interest in psychopathology. And if anybody is interested, feel free to join this webinar. And, when I first came to UK, English was not my first language. And some of the stories that you were saying, I know when I was doing my clinical attachment, my supervisor was telling me he went to a surgery and came back. And next day he said again, so he went and returned from the surgery. I was thinking like, what is this? He's having surgery every day. So I was thinking he looked okay. So he must have had like minor surgery. That's why he's come back. But then I realized that he was talking about the GP surgery. So, it's not easy when we come to different countries. It's, there is like adjustment that we have to do about the culture, language, etc., etc. So in UK, it was really difficult for me first few years. But luckily, when I joined British Indian Psychiatric Association, I met Subodh and others, and it was very influential in my medical education journey because we started this Train the Trainer program to medical schools in India. We started this workshop to support and learn from each other on how to set the curriculum and assessment strategies. So I think, our diaspora organization are very influential in making a difference in how people choose a career as well. So I'm always thinking, even now with BIPA, what can we do to support other members here? And I was fortunate that I went to Australia as well, and I had to do these case-based discussion and fellowship. And during that time, I had to train myself again to do the formulation, psychological formulation for patients. And I was speaking to my colleagues here, and I was speaking to you as well, Subodh. So it's really good to see that the college is, reintroduce this curriculum into the our UK training as well. So I think, when we work in different countries, it's really good that, there are so many differences, there are so many similarities and so many good practices that we can learn from each other. And when we go to different country, it makes us more stronger and we grow personally as well. For example, when I was in Australia, I think because there was a strong martial arts culture, I got into this Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I feel like, when we move and work in different countries, it helps us not in just in psychiatry, in personal growth as well. So I'll probably stop it there, Subodh, and maybe talk later on.
Thanks. That's very fascinating, I think, especially the multiple perspectives. And so we've heard all the various stories and having introduced my own story about the culture shock of the British motorways and not having read the highway code. I think, and there were some other elements as well. I think, I thought that once I came to England, I would find everybody as excited about Enid Blyton and Somerset Maugham as I was, and then nobody had heard of them, I think, and so it was a bit of a shock that they weren't as much of a household name as I thought they would be. But what I found, what helped me assimilate in a way, was psychiatry. I found that the psychiatric work was kind of very similar, very different in many ways. It was very, very different. I mean, I was seeing 7 new patients and, sometimes something like 100 follow-up patients in Mumbai. Coming to Wolverhampton, it was a very different story. But the stories of the people were kind of largely similar, the same themes of loss, the same themes of conflict, and the same psychopathologies, Sanjeev, that you referenced, So Sanjeev, with your expert hat on, what is this interaction? Are we just British psychiatrists in guise, or is there a more kind of convoluted story there?
Now you really ask for trouble, because I can go on for hours about that. But I'll try to do it as briefly as possible. I presume this is also the introduction to the history part of it, as to how did this...
That's right. Take your time,
Yeah.
Sanjeev.
Yeah. So as we know, asylums appeared in India in the late 18th century, about 10 years after they appeared in America. So both America and India had introduction of psychiatry as we know it at almost the same time. So any differences that we see between America and India are entirely of our own making, because psychiatry as an academic discipline starts at exactly the same time. And the first textbook of psychiatry that appears in India is by Dr. T.A. Weiss in Dhaka Asylum, who reports on the kinds of psychopathology that he sees. And he's also a Sanskritist, and he's also obviously knows Latin and Greek. So he compares the ancient traditions of both Indian medicine, both Unani to some extent, and a lot of Sanskrit. And he feels Indians are in a rude state of civilization, and psychiatric symptoms therefore are much less, and the rates of insanity are a third of that of UK. The book comes in for savage criticism from Winslow, the psychological medicine, thinks that this is a perfectly stupid idea, because India has a long culture, it has a long history, it has exquisite buildings, it has exquisite skills, and to think that they lack psychological sophistication is rubbish. So this debate between what is the Western idea of India then starts getting very subtly altered. By that time, the English doctors who have to come to India have to pass an IELTS. They have to pass an exam in Hindustani and show some interest in either Persian or Sanskrit to read the ancient textbooks. They also have to write, if possible, an exam in Telugu, which is the biggest language group in southern India. But Hindustani and either Persian or Sanskrit would do. The doctors start writing about their cases, and they start noticing that cultural factors are not as severe. Of course, the nature of essential symptoms is much the same, but the contexts that people live in are very different. But they start using words like hysteria by 1870. They start doing psychotherapy using the Granth Sahib by 1880. These are English doctors with their Indian collaborators. And there's a very interesting account by an English doctor who's trying to do therapy for an opiate addict in the Northwest province to a patient who speaks only Dari, through a soldier who speaks Urdu, because the English doctor has now had to learn Urdu to work in India. So he's doing in Urdu through a translator, through a fellow soldier, to a patient who speaks only Dari. So that kind of cultural accommodation is being actually developed. So the psychiatrist notes that you read in the asylum reports or in the detailed notes are exquisitely detailed. So obviously they are spending a lot of time understanding the cultural nuance of the experience of Indian patients. And then there's case notes after case notes and case notes. By 1900, more specialist doctors start coming in, people like Ewens and Overbeck Wright and the famous Owen Berkeley Hill, who comes there in the early 1910s. And these are very organically oriented. Ewens has worked in King's College. Overbeck Wright is a third or fourth generation East India Company doctor, and they've got very detailed notes. And they also write about all these things. The First World War obviously makes a difference because till then Indian doctors can't become officers. So they can't manage hospitals. But in the First World War, because they are fighting and the Indian and the English officers are either get shot at or die, and the Indian officers get promoted and they work pretty well. So Indian officers now become part of the official establishment. And this is also the time of Freud and things like that. So by 1920s, a new breed of English psychiatrists comes in. People like Lodge Patch, Owen Berkeley Hill comes back, and the British themselves set up Maudsley, the Institute of Psychiatry, for training psychiatrists for the empire. And about 30 or 40 psychiatrists, all the way from Lahore to Dhaka to Delhi from Agra to Benares to Bangalore and Madras, come to England. And so the 30, 40 psychiatrists come to England, and lots of psychiatrists go from England to teach in Indian hospitals, to the Indian medical service. These include names like Dunji Boy, who's as Western as they come. He goes to Berlin every year. He goes to a lot of European psychiatrists. There's Purushottam, who makes a trip to Australia and look at Australian psychiatry. There are other psychiatrists who are traveling all across Canada and America to Yale and Harvard and Mass General. So there's a whole cosmopolitan movement being built up. And by 1930s, the Indian psychiatrists or the South Asian psychiatrists built up the Royal Medical Psychological Association. And as they say, India, undivided India, now has more psychiatrists than either Canada or Australia. And therefore, the first association of psychiatrists outside of UK should occur in India itself, because there are about 40 or 50 psychiatrists. And of course, there's close links with England, and the Royal College sends them a silver medal and a sash, and its official big photographs are available. The first meeting is held in Lahore, and they eat chicken curry and on a very frosty morning in January. So we have a nice photograph of all of them sitting together in Lahore. But at the same time, Edward Mapother, who is an Irishman, of Irish descent. He's not an Irishman, but his father is a surgeon in London. But Mapother is an Irish psychiatrist by that definition of origin. He's British trained, but he's of Irish origin. He has been the instrumental person in setting up the Institute of Psychiatry, and he is invited to South Asia to advise on how to reform psychiatry on his own. In 1937, he makes 2 trips to India, and he finds they're abysmal. Lahore Asylum, which is a brand new asylum built in 1900, he makes an acerbic comment. It reminds him of the Regent's Park Zoo. The patients are kept in rooms to remind him of Regent Park Zoo. It's a monumental stupidity. There's a PWD concept of a lunatic. I mean, he's as acerbic. The worst statement is, as far as that white man's burden is concerned, looking after the mentally ill has not been a success for the white man in India. So he is very strong. I mean, it's terrible. But what happens in this whole concept is when he goes around, he meets all the doctors, and the doctors who have been trained at Maudsley are identified as the core for the teaching of psychiatry when India becomes independent. By 1939, independence of India is a given fact. 1931, the Independence of India Act has been passed, so it's a question of time. So this core of doctors who've been trained and in British psychiatry, people like Dunji Boy, who's the first president of the Indian Psychiatric Society and then heads the Karachi Mental Hospital, Govind Swami from Bangalore, Banarsi Das from Agra, Purushottam from Madras. These will be the focus of training in psychiatry. And the Institute of Psychiatry, which will be set up to mimic the Maudsley, will be the one at Bangalore, because Bangalore is technically independent of the British. It's in Mysore. And it is very cosmopolitan. It's got Americans and British and everybody living there. The Ford factory is there. The Indian Institute of Science is there. Nobel Prize winning scientists are there. So Bangalore is a nice place to be. What's also important is that post-war, because of this connection to Maudsley, people like Mayor Gross and Govind Swami make a formulation of teaching of psychiatry which is heavily dependent on Mayer Gross's textbook of psychiatry. Mayer Gross actually drafts his textbook while he's working in Bangalore from 1952 to 55 intermittently. So this whole tradition of Elliot Slater, Martin Roth, William Mayer Gross actually set the curriculum framework for psychiatry in South Asia.
Wow, fascinating.
And,
Martin
and the
Luther
next,
has been our president.
all of them have been there. All of them have been there. And soon after that, the first generation of students that comes out of places like NIMHANS or AIMS come to London to train. People like Venko Barao, people like Sharda Menon, people like Wig, who are now seeing the first wave of deinstitutionalization in the 60s and the first attempts at community psychiatry. So they actually try to move to leapfrog that we have never built asylums, adequate number of asylums. Can we go directly into community care services? So lots of the ideas that are developed, that are used in India in general hospital psychiatry or community psychiatry, are the transitional phase of British psychiatry of the 1960s. They still use Leff, they still use Goldberg, they still use institutionalization neurosis and things like that. But what happens in this whole context is, I'm not sure if it's true of Bangladesh, but most of the teaching, I heard somebody mention Oxford textbook of psychiatry, but the textbooks are relatively similar. We all read Davidson's textbook of medicine, we all read Bailey and Love, we all read Harrison, and we all read OTP. So the training has remained stuck to that core of the 1950s training curriculum, which was set up to be similar in South Asia as at the Maudsley. So this therefore gives rise to a very great degree of coherence and adaptability to South Asian psychiatrists because the formal training is very much Anglo-Saxon. On the other hand, because of their natural civic condition, psychiatrists in South Asia tend to be aware of multicultural nuances. We are a very overcrowded space with more languages between the edges of the south end of the subcontinent than in the whole of Europe and Asia combined, the rest of Europe and Asia combined. So we have hundreds of languages, we have all the major religions, we have all the racial groups all living together, most of the time in harmony. Most of the time, I would add. But there's a way of understanding each other which is over thousands of years. So there's a lot of nuances and lots of adjustments to very local parochial traditions versus global, which makes the work of psychiatry very challenging or also very interesting. So you can do therapy for a very disadvantaged person. You can be doing therapy for a software engineer. You can be doing therapy in somebody who speaks only English. Even in their homes, you can do psychotherapy with somebody who doesn't understand a word of any language other than the rural dialect of Kannada. So so this diversity and this flexibility of the psychiatrist therefore gives rise to cosmopolitan psychiatry. Because earlier you could view transcultural psychiatry as the object being the society. But now we have to think back, as people are already referred, as Anis referred, the experiences of the psychiatrists who have come here as a transcultural workforce. What have been their nuances of understanding British society? You can see Evans and Overbeck Wright and Lodgepatch and Berkeley Hill, every British psychiatrist tries to intervene in the cultural life of India.
Sure.
OBH particularly. Berkeley Hill specifically writes about the communal problems and the caste problems and the general political problems of India. So he's engaged with Indian social life at every possible level. So
I want to come back to cosmopolitan psychiatry, but let's stop at the point of the psychiatrist's experience. I kind of asked you a tongue-in-cheek question that are we all British psychiatrists and guys? And I think you kind of answered that. You said that we're heavily influenced by Anglo-Saxon psychiatry, but psychiatry itself was influenced by South Asia. At least the British psychiatry was, and I think so. That's. I mean, I think I resonate with that. I think when you were all rehearsing, I referenced a case example, which I'll share now, is that in pretty much the second or third week of my working in Wolverhampton, I met a Gujarati patient, which was interesting in its own right, because Wolverhampton, has got a large Punjabi population, so that's what I'd been told. So I wasn't expecting to see a Gujarati patient in my clinic in the first place, which I mean, obviously people can live anywhere, so I shouldn't have been that surprised, but that surprised me. And then the whole story was very much around her grief at having lost her dog, pet dog, uh, uh, almost a year before then. Now, I still remember the story almost, 3 decades later. And I think the fact that I remember it shows that how it influenced me. I think it just surprised me because it's not something I'd come across in my psychiatric practice in India. I'd done psychiatry in India and I'd not come across that. And then the whole story, unlike the other stories of, the usual stressors around family life, and which I saw in equal measure in my white patients, in my South Asian patients, in my Black patients, the losses around loss of role in work or financial stressors. This stressor was something new. And then so, though there was that assimilating experience of my role as a psychiatrist in the UK, there were also new experiences. Now that kind of a story is very common. I see this all the time, and I'm in tune with that. And I think you challenged me, I think, Sanjeev, by giving an example of where, how would I react? I mean, I don't have a pet, but I mean, I humanize them in many ways now, and I think when people talk about pets, I kind of have a very different understanding to what I had when I first came in, especially in relation to my psychiatric practice, my professional practice. So maybe I'm going to invite all of you to share your examples of how has that, what Sanjeev's talked about, the fact that we are South Asian psychiatrists working in the UK. How has that influenced your practice in a positive way, negative way, neutral way, whatever? Who wants to go first? Shri, shall we start with you? So Saima, okay, go on, Saima. I think you're on my screen now. So
Okay.
let's start with you. I don't know how you appeared on my screen, but you have.
Yeah, I don't know as well. So, just to add, my experience in UK, it's as Professor Jain mentioned, after explaining colonial psychiatry over there, and then our psychiatry was influenced by British psychiatry, but we were more multicultural. Like we were following clinical psychiatry by following British system, ICD-10, and in research we were following DSM. American. So we were reading both books and translating it into Urdu as well. So I also met Professor Dinesh Bogra in Lahore, Pakistan. And we are proud that he's the first South Asian president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and a historic milestone for us. I met Professor John Cox, former president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists in Lahore, Pakistan, and where we discussed using his Edinburgh postnatal depression scale in Urdu in one of our research studies. And I also met with Dr. Brian Martindale, founder of European Federation of Psychotherapy and Psychoanalytic, who introduced me to Dr. Rex Hay, founder of Community of Communities and of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So we are already related, very much related, what's happening in the UK, and I can see Dr. Afzal, Professor Afzal Javed, he has also joined, and we worked on recognizing, associating Fountain House, a therapeutic community in those days, with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and also I got the opportunity to write a chapter about therapeutic communities. That's also therapeutic communities for psychosis. I think people can't see due to, so it's already been there. Coming over here with regards to what else you want to, okay, you want to, so we'll arrange your visit, Professor Subodh. Oh.
No, this is interesting to hear that you have Fountain House. I mean, it's such an institution. Yeah, but so I guess let's ask. Thanks, Saima, for sharing your thoughts there, and let's ask Anis, how has it been for you as a British Bangladeshi psychiatrist working in the UK, and particularly with the forensic population, which I think is in itself quite challenging. I mean, I come across patients all the time, and I think I find that retaining that humanity with forensic patients is a challenge in itself for most of our colleagues. I think, has it been a big jump for you given your British Bangladeshi identity?
It is indeed. And I think it's not only we, even the local graduates, when they first come across the placement in the forensic psychiatry, it is a big culture shock. Because we enter into medical professions with a heart that we are here helping people, and in return, we'll get the gratitude out of it from the patient populations. But in the forensics unit, the first thing you see, it's like a big gate, secure service. You have to maintain security first, check your keys, and you yourself have to go through the security so that there is no contraband in your possessions. So that itself is a big shock, that where am I entering into? And then when you see the patients and hear their stories, particularly the offenses or the criminal history, and often horrendous childhood histories where many of them have been subject to childhood abuse, neglects, or they have been groomed by criminal gangs, and that set them on the criminal pathway. And then they develop mental illness using the drugs. And then some of them have committed offense against their own loved one. It may well be their own children or their wife or their parents. And when they come around, they have a huge emotional burden to go through. So these are a new world for me when I first came, that this kind of a specialty exists in the medicine. And it really put me off initially, to be honest, because when I first went to see, I was a court trainee in a seclusion suit. A man was raving with anger in a manic episode in the seclusion, and he was banging his head. And the staff are very skillful. I think I must say, I'm glad that I have been trained by very good consultants as well as the nursing colleagues. They knew that as a new trainee, how would it have any emotional impact on me. So they contained me as well as with the patients. And then I think the journey was very rewarding, because when you see this patient get better, they become rehabilitated in the community, and some of them live a very meaningful, productive life. Now, this also brings back to my original stories that I talked about, that young girl. So eventually what happened to that young girl? I was talking about, this is about the stories in the 80s. She was sent back again to the asylum, which is a sad story. Now, what happened recently with my engagement with the Royal College and the VIP6, I see a lot of a hope now, because there's a lot of awareness, there's a lot of treatment available, and the stigma. There is another interesting thing. I think this is where the reverse learning thing might be important. Now, in the textbook, we learn about the stigma. Now, remember the registrar that I mentioned? He just retired as a head of the department. His name Professor Abdullah Al Mamun. So I went back when I became a VIP6 chair. What can you do about the stigma? But he gave me a very insightful message. Look, the stigma is mostly among the educated people in the city dwelling. If you go in the village, people don't bother about those things. People just accept whatever he is or she is like, and they just move on in their life, which basically goes back to the ancient philosophy that we have, acceptance. You accept what life has thrown to you, and then you move on. And it was true, because then I went to the village and I looked in. There are wandering mad people in the streets, but all the restaurants or hotels in the village will offer them food. They do it in their spiritual belief that it would bring some blessings.
Correct.
And because they come for very poor socioeconomic, they don't have much bother about the stigma. They just accept him, that he is just off and we need to live with him. So coming back to your point, being a British Bangladeshi identity, every day I'm learning, and things are changing every day.
Wow.
And what I found in a forensic setting, my contribution is very valuable, in a sense that we have to think from all directions. We do in a multidisciplinary practices. So the patient in front of me, my colleagues from Wales, my colleague from other European countries, and me from Bangladeshi background, we bring wealth of knowledge as well as various vantage point to help that person to move on in their life. So I'll stop it there.
So a very interesting perspective, and I think it kind of chimes with, we've had lots of, I think Saima mentioned Professor Dinesh Bugra, Shushuk Jadhav, there are many people who have worked in this area of transcultural psychiatry. And what we find in transcultural psychiatry, I think that traditionally the phrase has been used where, Arthur Kleinman kind of started off and by going as an American psychiatrist to China, right? And then thinking about how do we, which is why the conversation with Sanjeev was very important. Amongst the panelists, if your mic is on, if you switch it off, please, if everyone switches off their mics, because there's a bit of an echo, which might not be great. So I think what you are saying, Afzal Javed, president of ex-president of World Psychiatric Association, a very good and beloved colleague of ours, has raised a similar question. So what value do we add? How do we improve the quality of psychiatric services here in the UK, the outcomes for an individual patient here in the UK, and the outcomes for psychiatry as a whole? I think that's the final section that I kind of want to move on to. But Sri, maybe you can start off by beginning the conversation, because you obviously have those perspectives, not just from one country, but multiple perspectives, having worked in Australia as well. And is that a challenge? Do you feel that each case has added more bows to your, to your quiver? How more arrows to your quiver, rather? What do you?
Yes, yeah. I mean, when I was working in India, I just wanted to say that I was supposed to know everything in my brain. We were not, if we say that, we have to go and check the books, it was not considered like a sign of a good psychiatrist in India. So after coming to UK, here it was a shock for me, because it was okay for us to say to the patients that, we don't know, can we check the guidelines, books, etc., etc. And even the yeah, I mean, sorry, Subodh, what was the question?
Yeah, I think we're just discussing your experience of working in multiple jurisdictions, Australia, India, UK. How does that add to the way you deal with an individual patient? Does it inform? Is it a challenge, the fact that you've trained in multiple places, worked in multiple places, or is it something that adds? Is it a benefit that you see? How do you see it?
For example, I'm a liaison psychiatrist by background. So when I was working in India, so we had the option to rotate through neurology, neurosurgery, radiology, and even the behavioral unit. It was really good because we had a setup called biofeedback in a room. We would do the therapy for the patients during our training, attaching all these probes to monitor the autonomic functions like, sweating and heart rate, respiratory rate. I thought it was really very powerful. And I learned that in India. So when I trained in UK, I've not seen this happening more often. I feel like, this sometimes, even though we do the therapy, it's a bit more conversation when we have these autonomic features, like when we tell the patient, how it's reducing, it's very powerful. I feel like, some of these things we can learn from other countries and other practices as well. When I was working in India, for example, when we present cases, we had to be very thorough. Even speech sample, we could not just give it as just like a flight of ideas. We had to give a small speech sample and say, why is it flight of ideas and not tangentiality or anything? I really feel like, this is quite good for us to know in detail about the psychopathology when it comes to making differential diagnosis. I feel like working in different countries, the importance is slightly different in the training. For example, in India, there's like a rich, focus on the academics, detailed psychopathology. In Australia, psychodynamic formulation. So I think all of them has definitely, and even in India, rotating to different medical specialties as well, has definitely made me a better psychiatrist, I think, than working in one country. And even in India, I just wanted to mention that we were supposed to give a life chart. For example, if somebody has a 10-year history, if you just have a life chart about some up and down and a summary, even though somebody doesn't have a time, just looking at that, it would give a very good snapshot. So I feel like each country has unique training opportunities, importance, and I think it's important for all of us to use that when we treat patients here as well.
Sure. I mean, I think I'll probably share my experience, but I think it's a very good question that Afzal has asked, and I think that in my own experience, I feel I already gave the example of how I felt with that patient. And I feel that the narrative is kind of shaped around differential deficit. So I think, and I think, I hold myself responsible because I've done a lot of work. Some of you in the group, not just here, but also in our amongst the delegates today, would know that I've talked a lot about differential attainment. So our resident doctors, for example, who come from South Asia, not having the same kind of pass rates as UK doctors. And I feel that in shaping the conversation around how do you assimilate and become and do as well as a British psychiatrist does in exams in this context, but by reference, it kind of almost means in relation to your practice as well. Sometimes you forget the strengths you bring. I don't think we've had that enough conversation around the strengths we bring and how do we actually meaningfully and mindfully and willfully utilize those strengths in improving the outcomes of our patients. And I think, Anish, the example that you gave about the rural versus urban situation I translated it as rural. You said educated versus maybe, a different thing. But in my head, partly because it related to my own personal example, I have a close family member, sadly passed away, who had bipolar disorder. And I think when I see my patients here, sometimes it's so difficult to give them a meaningful role in society. And we know there are lots of conversations going on about personal independence payments, disability payments. And he was given a role. He was given a role as a, as a caretaker of a temple. And that was very important to him. It provided meaning to him. It provided meaning to the community. It provided meaning to the family, to all of us as family, And I feel I've seen some comments in the chat that schizophrenia, depression is the same wherever it happens. Is it really the same in exactly the same way? I think clearly in my family member's case, I would say it wasn't the same because of the differential role that he'd got, and the outcome I think was different. So maybe the psychopathology that she's talking about may be similar, but I feel the fact that had a differential treatment did help. So Sanjeev, I'm going to ask you because you've studied this with a historical perspective, but you also are a practicing clinical psychiatrist. So clearly, I mean, I think, and I'm molecular geneticist at that. So I think
We'll leave that apart. So I'll
no,
give you a
is it
small.
the same? Is it the same? Is it
Yeah.
different?
Well, let me give you a vignette of the little time that I did actually work in England. So I was sent as a Commonwealth Fellow, like many people are, and I worked with Professor Pakel at Addenbrooke's at University of Cambridge on the mood disorder clinic. So I'll tell you an incident which, at both ends of the spectrum, we were discussing the discharge of a young single mother with a postpartum depression. And she had been in hospital for, I think, 8 weeks or something. And her discharge was being planned. And I was attending the grand rounds with Professor Pakel and a consultant and the NHS person and blah, blah, blah. There were 16 people.
Wow.
Discussing the rounds, the discharge. There was a neonatal nurse, there was a pediatric nurse, there was a mother and child nurse, there was a community psychiatry nurse, there was a resident, and there was all kinds of efforts being made. And somebody would provide housing because she was a single mother, no income. The whole system of 16 people going to chaperone her from the ward to best discharge home. Now, that was a system which left me completely envious. We just write a discharge slip, go home, and off they go. And here they were arranging taxis for the patient to go to the house and where should be handed the keys. So the system of care, which had been built up under the NHS or whatever, was truly mind-bogglingly wonderful. That somebody could actually plan a patient's life to that much detail. On the other hand, when I was assessing patients for my molecular genetic work, when I had to establish the diagnosis of mania, and that time I was using the SADS, affective disorders, whatever, affective disorders and schizophrenia, and I would spend about 30, 35 minutes chatting with them and trying to do as clinically chat as I could possibly do. And one of the patients who was actually, I think, on the Cambridge faculty or something, was involved with the university. They said, "Doctor, I've been ill for 15 years. Nobody has ever spoken to me for so long. In my history of psychiatric treatment, this is the longest conversation I've had with a psychiatrist."
Wow.
And that was truly astonishing to me. He never had to be admitted. So obviously we need to learn from both those experiences.
Yes.
We need to convey the kind of empathy and complete so-called openness which this person found in a completely different psychiatrist who's not even working locally, to be able to spend that much time and be interested in the problems that he was facing. And the patient felt very cut off from the psychiatric service because nobody's spoken to me in so much detail or asked me about my opinion about things. So somewhere we have to learn both things, that as India becomes more bureaucratized, as South Asia becomes more bureaucratized, and we don't have the kind of services that were being offered to this young lady, the families are smaller. What can we learn from the way the psychiatrists practice there? Can we bring some of our own more interpersonal, non-verbal, social skills into the day-to-day practice?
Yeah.
You know, have a
Yeah.
pakoda day for the patients in the OPD, serve them Indian food and chat while they're waiting. You know, do something different to make patients feel more welcome than the anonymity of the NHS.
I agree with that. I think that's the kind of thing that community building that comes so naturally to people of South Asian origin generally, and you don't see that being translated in the professional lives. I think we complain, we talk about community psychiatry, but as you say, community psychiatry is largely corporatized. It's not a genuine community psychiatry, and I think it could be so much more, given that a large part of the workforce is South Asian. They build communities every day of their life. Anish, you got your hand up, so I'm going to invite you in. And then after that, we got a few questions, and I do want to get through the questions. So there are some interesting questions. Anish.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to share with you about the point you made. Although the schizophrenia, depressions, manic disorders, there are some underpinning biological mechanism behind this. But phenomenology is changed according to the culture, and particularly the coping skills. And I think this is where maybe the reverse innovation is going to be very powerful. One of the things that we have seen, I think you have also said that one, we didn't see as many as depressed patients in Bangladesh as you see it here. And, and I think my heart breaks when I see so many of young medical students, even the students are on the antidepressant medical. We don't see it that much. So there may be number of mechanism behind that. One is the pharmaceuticals companies interest. Another one is the mechanism people try to get quick solution, believing that medications might probably solve the problem. But one point I wanted to make is the spirituality. Now, what I learned from my work with the refugees all over the world and the victims of tortures or recently I'm working with the enforced disappearance, the spirituality gives them some hope and some mechanism to live with. If we do not incorporate that spirituality, I think we lose a big chunk of our treatment armament. And I can tell you that one in our hospital in Secure Service in Tamarin, we have employed an imam, a Sikh, and a chaplain service. So they are expertise. They deal with that one. And what we found, since we have the spiritual service, our patients' engagement and the recovery is much more quicker and much more meaningful. And I think this is something we could capitalize from people in the low resource setting. How it's not only for the patients, it's also the family members, because they make meaning, they make sense. Why is that person is suffering from that conditions, and why? How should I react? Having said so, there is a caveat. It could be exploited. We know that one. We know sometimes so-called spiritual healers exploit people at the expense of a huge amount of money, or sometimes they discourage them to go to the medical faculties. There's some work need to be done, but I think now that the literature is quite well established, we know people who are religious, they're less likely to commit suicide. And I suspect this is also case to certain extent, probably the depression, because there's some other ways to get some support from the family and then themselves with spiritual belief for better future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I think Anand makes the point in the chat that chaplaincy services, and I think I've seen such an improvement in the chaplaincy services in the UK, and I think that's the resource that hopefully everyone is utilizing in their clinical work, because I find that quite helpful for my patients, getting the local chaplaincy service involved. So I'm going to start with the questions now. Prem Jayapal has a very interesting question. And maybe one of you can start off, and if you feel particularly inclined to answer that, put your hand up in the chat, and then I'll take that. Is cultural differences now outdated because of intersectionality and globalization? And do other cultures really have anything to offer in terms of nuance, understanding of mental health? There is a non-diagnostic way of looking at mental health, alternative practice. I guess this is the question. I mean, kind of referencing culture-bound syndromes, the whole idea of, that there is, maybe Sanjeev, start with you, because you mentioned cosmopolitan psychiatry, which probably was touching on that,
Right.
That is psychiatry cosmopolitan psychiatry now, or is there a role for transcultural psychiatry where we kind of take into account specific cultural backgrounds?
Again, since I'm probably the oldest member in the group, I remember reading the first, postgraduate psychiatry. I think it was from some Scottish authors, and they tell a very interesting comment. He says this is written probably in the late 70s or early 80s. He said earlier you could tell a person's background from the way they spoke, but after the Beatles, everybody speaks English the same way, so you can't make out class of people in England anymore, or their accent or regional accents have disappeared. Everybody speaks Liverpudlian. Now, this internationalization, or in the case of England, the uniformity of English education and English culture, because the English-speaking world is still connected to it. So whether it's American or British or Indian or Pakistani or Bangladeshi, there is a constant give and take between these cultures. And there are certain commonalities which emerge because of this. The top Bhangra music comes from Birmingham. It is mixed in Birmingham. It is made in Birmingham. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan concerts in London were more strictly produced than anywhere in India. So this kind of cultural nuancing is leading to an internationalization of psychiatry. And because all said and done, South Asia is the largest single population in the world. India itself is the largest population. Combine that with Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal and Sri Lanka, we probably account for 35 to 40% of the world's population in any case. So obviously, the kind of psychiatrist, the psychiatric condition, and the way we understand it has to have a bearing on what the other 60% feels like. Because the vast majority of mentally ill people are from South Asia. So that's a fact of life. So why don't we understand how the cultural diversities and how the cultural attitudes to mental illness, if we are successful, then why are we successful? If we find our societies are more tolerant, why are we more tolerant? If we still find people wandering on the street without treatment but with food, is that a happy state to be? How do we provide both food and treatment? And if we can learn that, we can tackle the homelessness of London streets better, or of San Francisco and California better, or of Munich and France better. So we need to understand how is it that a crowded, poor, upwardly mobile societies like South Asia deal with mental illness, because that is the model. See, world goes up and down. So what we are now, other people may be in a few years, either on the upslope or on the downslope. But psychiatry will remain forever. And psychiatrists will remain forever because mental illness is forever. So we have to learn from this in a dynamic way and learn to adapt. So I really think a cosmopolitan psychiatry has to emerge, because all said and done, this English-speaking psychiatry of DSM ICD-9 now counts as psychiatric care in about 2/3 of the world.
Right.
So why don't we get voices from each of those participants rather than just Washington and London?
I mean, that's a good point. I think I can see Amrit and others making, and Afzal has particularly raised that point. And I think maybe I'm inviting one or two comments from my panelists. Is that, do you feel that that voice that Sanjeev is talking about, that can contribute to the internationalization of psychiatry, and not a particular slant, a particular view of psychiatry, is that voice possible? Do you have? I mean, all of you, Saima, Sri, and Anish, you are members of the diaspora committee of the college, for example. So you do have a voice in a formal way as well. Do you feel that you are able to utilize that voice to shape psychiatry of the future, or does it still remain a challenge? And if so, maybe in brief, if there are challenges. But my first question was, are you able to put that voice in to kind of internationalize psychiatry, bring your South Asian heritage, South Asian voice to shape psychiatry itself?
Who do you want to go first?
Anyone. Anis, go on then. Whoever.
Okay. I would say COVID has been a boon for us. So following that, we have access to this webinar or access to the internet services all over the world now. So yes, I think the voice is not a problem. If you wanted to speak up, no one is going to stop you. I think the issue here is that building a strong evidence base and good research. And unfortunately, because psychiatry is not of interest from many funding agencies, there is very little research there. And secondly, our patients are one of the most vulnerable section of the society. No one cares for them. It's only we, the psychiatrists, mental professionals, and the family members who have first-hand experience. These are the one only get involved. So I said the voice is not a problem. I think the problem here is that we need to have probably a new kind of leadership who can connect the dots. And I give you one example. I've been working on the training the judges. Now, as I said, the forensic psychiatry is relatively very new specialties across the globe. So many other countries doesn't have that knowledge how much we can rehabilitate a person who has committed offense in the context of mental illness. And what I found, there is some literature, what I found that most of the cases of the public and the judge's understanding of a madman is an evil person and there is no hope for them. Now, that narrative need to be changed. And what I found working with the judges in Bangladesh, it is always possible because I have worked the judges here in the UK. And I think it's not only the Bangladesh, judges here in the UK, in probably a few years back, they didn't have any specialized training as well. It's only recently this is coming now into the mainstream. Unfortunately, there are some good case laws are being developed, how instead of just taking the punitive cases rather than the rehabilitation and the treatment as the best outcome for all over. Now, coming back, the building evidence, for example, case studies in Bangladesh, couple of cases I have come across where the judges was convinced this person was mentally ill. So instead of the prison sentence, they have given the options for treatment, and that person has gone back to a very productive life in the society. So those kind of things need to be written up, and we need to communicate in the scientific journals as well as the other professionals who involve, like as I said, the judiciaries, probations, so that they learn about the mental disorder and they can help both the society and the patients to be a safe society. I'm talking in the context of forensic mental health. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, good to hear that you feel that there is a voice that you can express. I think it's really important that you feel. Sri, did you want to come in? I can see your mic is open.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, we have made a huge progress in psychiatry, but when it comes to awareness and stigma, we still have a long way to go. I feel being a diaspora representative here, I feel like, we have a role and responsibility, and we have a voice to make sure that we do every effort to reduce the stigma in the community, involving more with the Indian community, other ethnic minority communities, either in religious places. We have to go there and reach. For example, like, I'm a liaison psychiatrist, I work in a national surveys. When it comes to all these persistent physical symptoms, chronic fatigue, I hardly see anybody from ethnic minority coming to clinic. So there are people who have these symptoms, but they're not coming. There could be several reasons for that. I feel like, we have a voice to we have a voice to play, whether it's at the college, at the even I'm a Congress co-chair. I think we need to get the voices, evidence, and the sessions from different countries, different groups to see how can we increase the awareness, reduce the stigma, and improve the care for patients. And one more thing is medical school. I feel like that's the place where we are probably need to do more work to train future doctors to improve patient care.
Thanks. I mean, I think so. I do feel that this is an important point. I think just in terms of action points, I think, I mean, thinking about all the members in the chat and and you all are members of the Diaspora Committee, I think it's worth thinking about how can we actually do this in a more coordinated way. I think Sanjeev has given us a good challenge that how can we utilize, and then Afzal has said the same thing, how to utilize that South Asian expertise and experience that you bring, because we lived experience of being a South Asian person, but also being a South Asian psychiatrist in particular. And how do you use that to shape modern psychiatric training and psychiatric services? So I hope that may be a point for discussion in your committees and then taking it forward. I want to move on to the next question. And the next question is from my good friend and colleague, Deep Sarur, who's asked about loneliness and isolation. And he says that with his experience of India, is that there are always people around. I think some of you who were at the Congress would have seen the session from Simon Gilbody, a good friend and senior academic, talking about how loneliness was the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of this impact on your health outcomes, physical and mental health outcomes. So we all know that the science is pretty good. Is that a factor? Have we as South Asian psychiatrists, again, done enough to think about factors like this, which we've taken for granted? That's what we do, right? Address loneliness. If we, I feel that's what happens in our personal lives. We try and reach out to lonely people. Is that something that we do in our professional lives, in our professional capacities? If not, what are the barriers? Saima?
So I'm going to share my experience from both worlds. As you mentioned, Subodh, over there, it's different. There is family structure, there are neighbors, there are other people who are going to come in and support the person. What I feel in my practice, and I have heard from Anis as well, that they accepted the person and then they involve that person in various things. But equally, I'm going to highlight that sometimes, like the safeguarding and other abuse or other aspects, that's sometimes neglected if services are not strong over in South Asian countries. So that needs to be kept in mind in some remote areas I'm talking about. And here in UK, I have seen, because of the family structure is more going towards individual instead of group or family. It's we are talking about more individual and giving so much autonomy to an individual person. That I saw in my practice, like when a person is suicidal, we have to put in services. And when nowadays, if services, the resources are less, it's quite difficult to keep people safe, but we are doing it within our resources and asking for more help. Compared to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, there is family and other people around the person all the time. Also, I would like to highlight about loneliness here. There are services, day centers. We try to engage them with different services and try to make them as much as a productive part of their of the society. So I feel that we are all advocating. I'm going to share, if there is a time, of recent my while working with the assertive community team, I had to fight with forensics and prison services because a person with emotionally personality disorder was going again back in prison numerous times after destroying things, because that's the best way a person was feeling they are contained. So I had to fight with forensic services to go out of their criteria to accept the person, because the person was not engaging with other services. So even judge, so yeah, we are raising voices. And I'm going to also here just to add quickly that we need more people, more diverse people in senior roles like Subodh, Ananta Dave in ICB, Dr. Razer Fan in leadership roles in college, and especially females. And I'm going to highlight about college policy, about equity, equal 50-50 female male speakers and other things. So that's really helpful, because when we struggle, it's still happening, even in 2025. If that policy is not there, yeah, we'll struggle. Thank you.
Thanks. So very valid points. I think I'm just going to make a comment there. And I think again, it's something for us to reflect on. I think is something which I've realized. I mean, I used to often criticize community psychiatry in the UK, and I probably still do. I think because I feel that we have a great systems response, like Sanjeev you were describing. The multiple stakeholders who are involved in supporting a patient in the community. But I used to criticize that. Well, but where is the community? I think so. We have got community psychiatry, we've got community psychiatry services, but where is the community? Um, I think, but I also know now, and maybe this has come to me after many, many years of living in the UK, is that the community is thriving in the UK. I think we just need to find them. As a runner, I know there's a park running community. If you are a Morris dancer, there's a dancing community. If you are a churchgoer, there are choir communities. Well, if it's not, you actually don't even need to be a religious person to be a part of a choir, and then so on and so forth. So I think there are many, many different communities, and I think I guess the challenge for us, I think, is thinking about how do we tap into those communities, and I think have we done enough to tap into those communities? And then, and my final comment on this topic before I move on to the next question will be that being a South Asian, I think, and I don't know whether Anish you have a similar saying, but I think in Pakistan and India we probably have a saying where the guest is like God. And I wonder whether we bring that ethos in our, say, for example, inpatient units. Do we think of our patients as somebody who we respect and welcome in our setting? They are our guests as much as they are under our care. Are we looking after their sleep? Are we looking after their food? Are we giving them good quality food? And I wonder that there's something about us as South Asian psychiatrists in particular, bringing that South Asian heritage lens into our being as well, which we sometimes leave at the entry of the hospital. When you walk into the hospital, you are now a psychiatrist, just a professional psychiatrist who could be anywhere in the world. So I invite comments from people. Sanjeev, do you want to say anything about that final comment? And I think I've got a question specifically for you. So you can start off, and I'll read the question for you.
Not really. I think you've said it quite well, because this kind of the loneliness and all these issues become are obviously an issue, but the issue is much larger. That at a global level, are we going to accept the physical reality of multiculturalism, which we do accept as a political norm, but the emotional multicultural attitudes is still a work in development. And as psychiatrists, it is our job to foster that, because ultimately psychological well-being depends on the good old model of cultural well-being. Unless you are a part of the cog of society, no matter who you are, things will not go right. And how do we make a new society which is actually cognizant of the experience of every small cog, which are often of different sizes? So that is the ultimate golden aim of psychiatry. And I think we should not get rid of that ideal in the pragmatics of day-to-day life. That it is a job to create that multicultural acceptance and transhumanism. That's what we are trained for.
And that's a good question to segue into my next question, which is from Safia Afghan, talking about that we haven't talked much about colonialism. I referenced it right at the beginning, but it is in the collective consciousness of South Asians because we're all colonized. Does that have a role to play in maybe either facilitating this or in us not being able to bring some of these identities into our daily practice? That's a question for you, Sanjeev.
Oh, that's for me. Okay. So, there's also, one must understand that colonialism is also a bogeyman. That very often we keep whatever we don't find convenient, we blame the colonial period. We don't obey rules because civil disobedience was part of our freedom struggle. So it's our right to be disobedient to civic norms. It's our right to walk on railway paths, as was pointed out by Anis. In England, you'd get sectioned. In India, you'd become a leader. You'll become MP if you walk on the railway paths. A completely different outcome. So, that's also part of the colonial thing. That for us, walking on railway paths is civic disobedience. We fought on that. So, but that apart, I think the fact remains that colonization is just a temporary aberration in the long history of our continent, of the South Asian continent. We were directly ruled by the British for 80 years, and we have now been independent for almost 80 years. You can't flog a dead horse or an old horse to infinity. You have, I mean, it's 80 years of being independent. Surely, if it was such a big problem, come to terms with it, internalize it, introject it, sublimate it, whatever. But you can't keep going back to the same old rhetoric of blame. And so that's the way I look at it, because colonial exploitation, economic exploitation is one thing. The fact that England did not invest in public health in India at the time it was building and renovating all the hospitals in London. You go to any hospital in London, it's been renovated between 1857 and 1925.
Oh.
All the drains, all the underground, everything in London is built with colonial money. But what do you want to do? You want to take them back brick by brick? What do you want to do? The fact that at least somebody spent that money in public good, and now when our countries are becoming players in world economy, why don't we spend that much in public goods? Now that's the question we should learn from colonialism. If they extracted money, why aren't we putting in money in health? Now that is a more uncomfortable question. Why are post-colonial governments as colonial in their attitudes, unlike the people?
Sure.
So we have to interrogate this at many, many levels.
So, I mean, I think it's a rich discussion, and we could go on.
Yes.
I'm aware it's the last 4 minutes, so and there are still some more questions, and I don't think I'll have time to take all of the questions. I think all questions are kind of in a similar vein, which is to say that I'm going to ask a question about teaching of this. How do we train people, or training future psychiatrists? How do we train our future psychiatrists to be aware of these things? So short answers from each of you, please. I think, and then maybe also some kind of, if you have a take-home point for our audience today, feel free to share that as well. Anish, let's start with you. Do you have any thoughts on how do we train our future psychiatrists to be aware of the issues that we've discussed today around transcultural psychiatry, the need to kind of think about a cosmopolitan psychiatry, bring our whole selves? How do we actually do that in our training?
I think the most important part, as I mentioned, that we need to be ourselves as a role model, because we have the privilege now to be able to be part of the Royal College and other international societies.
Sure.
And we need to give a leverage to people on the ground that doing the work. And I think there has already been a movement come up that the research should be driven by the people who are most on the forefront, rather than someone who is sitting on the top academic echelon in some high place position in a universities. So this is something we could promote that one. I'll just like to give an example for we as a British Bangladesh Psychiatrists Association, starting working with the victims of enforced disappearances. Now, the problem of the enforced disappearance occur mostly in the low income countries, because most of the developed countries have gone past these autocratic regimes, or they have a good governance in structures, or for their psyche it is almost impossible to think of. But in the United Nations have now itself a sections where they're looking into the cases of enforced disappearance, and their psychopathology is very unique, because
Sure.
if someone have died, you know that there's a dead body, but if someone has disappeared, so it is not the
same.
grief reaction.
Anish,
So
let's not go into the details of that. That sounds like a fascinating piece of work. So thank you for doing that. Sri, you just put something in the chat, but again, a brief.
I think we probably need to look at educating patients and also doctors. I think even as a diaspora organization, we all can do as much as possible. For example, from BIPA, we are planning to do joint case conferences between Postgraduate Institute in India and UK, learning about different good practices, differences. Just a simple example for patients, we can create educational videos, etc.
Thank you. Saima?
So as already mentioned, I'll keep it brief. Shri was highlighting about formulation, and I understand there is a workforce group as well. So to use that platform to train doctors about culturally appropriate formulation. And also we can, because now I'm a chair of a transcultural psychiatry group, so to take it further, to develop webinars, or educational modules. And one thing to highlight, I'm not sure how, because services are inconsistent, to train junior doctors or psychiatrists to highlight this, that their link with spiritual healers or chaplains or imam coming to the hospital and rabbi, that's very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, Sanjeev, a final word from you, brief one.
No, it's just that, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, the idea that culturals are fixed is gone. Cultures are dynamic. And we have to keep the culture of engage in psychiatry in a dynamic way. As things change, we have to be aware of the dynamics of why cultures are changing and what is a common thread that we want to continue across cultures as they change. The notion of care, the question of respect, the question of autonomy, the question of dignity of the patient's life, these are universals.
That's right.
And we have to communicate that those things should be attempted in every different culture. You cannot say that in that culture things are different and therefore need not do this. That should
Sure.
never come to our head.
And that's a great point to end on, Sanjeev, because I think, and that in a way kind of sums up the journey of all of us, because when you migrate, that's what happens. You change and then you adapt and assimilate, both at the same time. And you do that. And I feel that because it's dynamic, so you can't just have one fixed frame of reference. So thank you very much. It's been a very rich discussion. Thank you all who have attended. I think very rich discussion in the chat and your Q&As as well. Sorry, we've gone a little bit over time, but please use the feedback. We absolutely need your feedback to know what to do better next time, and indeed to know what to continue to do. So thank you again, and do celebrate the South Asian Heritage Month. Go and tell your story to your colleagues who may not know much about South Asia. I think it's important that we do that and we feel comfortable doing that. So if there isn't a program in your place of work, try and get a little conversation going about this. It's a great excuse to do that. Thank you all very much and have a lovely afternoon. And thank you to my panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Also